My name is Tam, and I had never visited Ninh Bình before the summer. I decided to see my cousin Hai, who was fulfilling his mandatory military service at a remote outpost in that province. Work had kept me pinned in the bustle of Hanoi for years, so a short trip south seemed both an opportunity for rest and a chance to reconnect with family. I naively imagined the journey would be simple: a bus ride, a brief stay, a few stories exchanged, and a quick return to city life. The bus from Hanoi jolted over potholed roads, leaving clouds of dust in its wake. Through the windows, I watched the landscape transform. Urban sprawl melting into rice paddies and limestone karsts rising from the earth like the backs of ancient beasts. By the time we arrived at a humble station in northern Ninh Bình, twilight hung overhead, streaking the sky with orange and purple. My cousin's outpost lay another hour away in a hilly district. Taxis were scarce at the station, so I asked around for lodging near that area. An old vendor mentioned a cluster of goose houses by a canal, about halfway to the outpost. But he also mumbled something about them often being full due to weekend travelers and relatives visiting nearby army bases. Undeterred, I found a motorcycle taxi, XEOM, driven by a man in his 60s named Chuang. He wore a battered army jacket and had a crinkled smile. I explained my destination: I want to stay near the canal, then continue to the outpost tomorrow. Chuang nodded slowly, as if considering. I know a place. Cheap lodging, old woman rents out a room. It's not exactly a hotel, but workable. My nephew recommended it once. His cryptic tone gave me pause, but the hour was late, and I was tired. That's fine, I agreed. Any bed for the night will do. He helped strap my duffel to the back of his bike. With a roar, the engine came alive, and we sped into the deepening dusk. The roads grew narrower, lined by towering banana trees and the occasional shack. The moon emerged, half-veiled by drifting clouds. A hush blanketed the countryside. Eventually, we turned onto a dirt lane running parallel to a sluggish canal whose water reflected the faint starlight. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and algae. Chuang stopped outside a single-story, lime-washed house with a rusted tin roof. Light glowed dimly from a single window. Here, he announced. Owner's name is Madame Ha. She might have space. Good luck. I thanked him, paid the fare, and stepped gingerly onto the dirt yard. Cicadas chirped in shrill chorus. My spine tingled with a sense of the unfamiliar. It was so different from Hanoi's neon glare. I approached the wooden door, heart thumping, uncertain what kind of welcome I'd receive. I knocked softly. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a petite, elderly woman with silver hair knotted at the back of her head. Her eyes were sharp despite her years. "Who's there?" she asked in a cautious voice. "Chow chow ba, I'm sorry to bother you so late," I said, using polite Vietnamese terms. Chuang the XEOM suggested you might have a spare room for the night. Her gaze flickered to my duffel, then to me. She exhaled, stepping aside. "Come in then. I'm Ha. It's just me here nowadays. I sometimes let travelers stay, for a small fee." The interior was modest, a single main room with an old table, wooden chairs, and a small altar in the corner. Yellowed photographs adorned the wall, showing younger versions of Ha and presumably her late husband in some old uniform. A single overhead bulb cast long shadows. The corridor on the right led to a back door. A faint musty odor lingered, though the place appeared clean enough. "Payment is 50,000 dong for the night," Ha stated matter-of-factly, her voice subdued. "I can give you a bowl of rice and some fish soup if you're hungry." I nodded gratefully. "Thank you, I appreciate that." While she reheated the soup on a charcoal stove behind the house, I surveyed the living space. A battered radio sat silent on a shelf. On the altar, incense sticks had burned down to stubs. The quiet weighed on me, magnified by the throbbing chirp of insects outside. Ha soon returned, handing me a chipped bowl with steaming rice and fish broth. I ate quickly, hunger overriding the bland taste. She regarded me from the corner of her eye. "Where are you headed tomorrow?" "My cousin's in the army, stationed near the mountains," I explained. "I'll visit him, then head back to the city." She nodded, though her expression remained unreadable. She led me to a tiny side room with a single bed. A bamboo mat covered the mattress, and a worn blanket folded at the foot. The only window overlooked the canal. Moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, and the sound of water lapping the banks drifted in. "It's not fancy," Ha said, "but you can rest." I thanked her politely. She left me alone, shutting the door. Tired from my journey, I collapsed onto the bed. My muscles ached. Within minutes, I drifted off, lulled by the faint splashing of canal water. Something woke me at dawn, the sound of a rooster crowing. Disoriented, I sat up, blinking at the watery sunlight streaming through the window. The canal glimmered with early morning light. My phone read 5:30 a.m. I still felt groggy, but the brightening sky stirred me to get up. I wandered outside into the yard. Ha was nowhere to be seen, but I spotted a small cooking area in back. The canal lay only 15 steps from the house, fringed by tall reeds. As I stretched, I noticed a small path that curved around the rear of the property. Curiosity nudged me, so I followed it. The path led behind the house, weaving through thick grass. My nose caught a faint smell of damp decay. Then my eyes locked on a stone marker jutting from the ground, some sort of old grave marker. My breath caught. Was there a grave here, directly behind the house? The marker bore faint engravings, eroded by time. My Vietnamese reading was decent, but the script looked archaic. I recognized a few strokes that might have been a family name. Moss clung to the edges. The air felt colder, as though a subtle wind drifted from the canal. A rustle in the grass made me jump, only to find it was just a stray cat fleeing. I exhaled, unsettled. Stepping closer, I realized a second, smaller marker leaned behind the first, partly covered by vines. Tu graves? The notion that I'd slept mere meters from old burial sites gave me chills. Perhaps that explained the house's musty aura. Could the occupant be relatives of the deceased? Footsteps crunched on gravel behind me. Ha appeared, holding a kettle. "You're up early," she noted curtly. Her eyes flicked to the markers, then back to me. "You found them." I cleared my throat. "Yes, I didn't realize you had graves so close." She shrugged, her face expressionless. "They're from my husband's family line. Passed long ago. I keep them here. Is it a problem?" The question gave me pause. "No, not a problem," I lied, ignoring my rising unease. "I was just surprised." She nodded absently. Best not to wander too much around them. Then, turning abruptly, she walked back toward the house. Her tone was neither threatening nor particularly warm, just matter of fact. The hair on my arms prickled. Something about the presence of those tombs felt off. Despite the odd tension, I readied myself to visit my cousin that morning. Ha prepared a simple breakfast, rice porridge, and said a local bus could drop me near the outpost. I ate quickly, thanking her. My plan: meet Cousin Hai, spend the day chatting, then return in the evening. With luck, I'd find a better lodging for the night, if necessary. The bus ride took about 40 minutes. My cousin's outpost was nestled at the foot of mist-shrouded hills. Soldiers milled about, practicing drills or handling routine tasks. I approached the guard kiosk and asked for Bin Hai, explaining I was family. After a short wait, Hai emerged, face lighting up when he saw me. "Tam? You made it!" he exclaimed, pulling me into a quick embrace. He wore his fatigues, sweat glistening on his brow from morning training. I teased him about looking thinner, and he rolled his eyes. Army life is no spa, believe me. We spent hours catching up. Over lunch at the mess hall, he recounted daily drills and chores. He seemed in decent spirits, though he did mention hearing local rumors. "People around here are superstitious about the canal region," he said. "Some villagers talk about lights at night, strange sightings near old grave plots." My stomach flipped. I described the lodging I found, mentioning the graves behind it. Hai's brow furrowed. "You should be careful. The locals have plenty of ghost stories. Some claim a black shadow roams that area. Soldiers on night patrol have glimpsed shapes by the canal, but found nothing when investigating." My chest tightened. A black shadow? That triggered a memory. Last night, I'd slept deeply, but had I felt something in the room? The details were fuzzy. Suddenly, the notion of returning to Ha's house felt more daunting. We parted ways mid-afternoon. He had duties to attend, promising to meet me next time if I stayed longer. With a wave, I boarded the bus back toward the canal. The sun dipped behind rolling hills, painting them gold. My mind replayed his caution about rumored shadows. I tried telling myself they were just folklore. Back at Ha's house near dusk, I considered finding a different guest house. But the local inn was apparently full, as a group of traveling merchants had booked the limited rooms. With mild reluctance, I resigned to staying another night here.
Assim d'un boterde.
Another 50,000 if you want the same room, she said. I offered a polite smile. Yes, that's fine, I lied. Fear gnawed at me, but I had no immediate alternative. She served a modest dinner, stir-fried greens and a fish sauce dip. I forced it down, appetite dulled by anxiety. Darkness settled early. The canal behind the house glistened under a half-moon, reed swaying. I locked my room's door from the inside. The single overhead bulb flickered. My limbs felt heavy from the day's travel, but I dreaded the idea of nightmares. Sure enough, soon after I dozed, I dreamed I was lying in the same bed, but the walls were warped, as if cast in murky water. A heavy hush pressed on my ears. Then I sensed movement above me. Looking up, I saw a huge black shape perched on top of the wardrobe near the corner, like a crouching figure with elongated limbs. My blood iced. The shape peered down at me, though I couldn't discern eyes in the swirling darkness. It slowly extended an arm, impossibly long, fingertips scraping the ceiling. I tried to scream, but no sound left my throat. My chest squeezed, as though an invisible weight pinned me. The black shadow leapt from the wardrobe, landing silently at the foot of my bed. Its presence radiated cold. The overhead bulb in the dream flickered, painting the figure in strobing half-light. I saw an impression of an eerily contorted face, or maybe just blank darkness. My mind roiled with panic. Suddenly, I snapped awake, gasping. My heart hammered. I was still in bed, the overhead light off. No sign of a monstrous shape. The room was quiet except for my ragged breathing. A nightmare. But it felt so visceral, sweat drenched me. My eyes darted to the wardrobe in real life. Nothing perched there. Just the silent gloom. I realized it was near midnight, and I'd only been asleep an hour or two. My brain refused to calm, bombarded by the vivid memory of that black figure. The canal's watery reflection cast ghostly patterns on the walls. I lay trembling for half the night, drifting in and out of fitful slumber. Morning light eventually rescued me from the bed. I stepped out, my eyes gritty from lack of rest. Ha was busy in the yard, scattering feed for her chickens. I hesitated, then decided to share a portion of my experience. I had a nightmare, I ventured, voice rasping. It felt so real, like a shadow on top of the wardrobe. She paused, turning to me with a frown. Perhaps your mind is playing tricks, she said flatly. This region can unnerve city folk. Then more quietly, but if it persists, you may want to see a temple priest. Her nonchalant tone irked me. Something told me she knew more than she let on. I forced a nod, uncertain if pressing her would help. After a quick, tasteless breakfast, I decided to explore the surroundings more thoroughly, maybe unearth clues about this black shadow phenomenon. If this presence was linked to the graves behind the house, I wanted answers. Strolling along the canal, I encountered a friendly fisherman, Mr. Lamb, untangling nets. We exchanged greetings. I asked if he knew anything about the property behind me. He shrugged, glancing at Ha's house. Used to be farmland, but that family kept the land around their private graves. Locals say the original owners died tragically. Some rumor a dark spirit roams at night, especially near that cluster of tombs. Could be nonsense, though. I swallowed. So the rumor was more widespread. Have you seen anything yourself? Lamb's expression darkened. At times from my boat, I see shapes near that bank after sunset, like a tall silhouette. But each time I approach, it's gone. Could be my imagination. His words matched the hush of dread I felt. I thanked him, returning to the house with unsettled thoughts swirling. As I passed by the old grave markers behind the property, I noticed something: fresh footprints in the soft dirt, near the second, smaller marker. They looked like my shoe size, but I was sure I hadn't walked there since the first morning. The marks led from the marker up to the back door. My heart lurched. Could it be me while sleepwalking? Or was it a sign of something else? I found Ha in the kitchen area, washing vegetables. Summoning courage, I confronted her politely. Madam, I see footprints near the graves. I had a disturbing nightmare. Could you tell me more about these tombs? Are they truly your relatives? She dried her hands, face etched with tension. A moment passed before she spoke. They're from my husband's lineage, yes. He died decades ago, in an accident. The second grave is my daughter's, she passed young. Some say her spirit lingers. Her gaze flicked up, almost accusatory. Maybe you stepped on her resting place or disturbed something unintentionally. A prickle of guilt and confusion. I didn't mean any disrespect. I only discovered them by accident. Her shoulders sagged. Apologies. I'm not blaming you, but the spirits here can be restless. She paused, eyes haunted. Sometimes I hear a scratching at my back door late at night, as if my daughter wants to come inside. It's been that way for years. I just endure it. My pulse pounded. Could the black shadow in my nightmare be the vengeful spirit of her daughter, or something else entirely? The idea unsettled me. I'm sorry, I managed. Do you think, is there a local temple or someone who can help address this? Ha hesitated, then nodded. Yes. A monk named Thay Tuan presides at a small temple a few kilometers away. People say he can calm troubled souls. If you're truly disturbed, see him. But I can't guarantee results. Perhaps it's just your imagination, or your city nerves. She resumed her chores, leaving me standing there with roiling thoughts. Imagination or not, the sense of a malevolent presence was growing. I resolved to find this Thay Tuan. If I was stuck here another night, I wanted some spiritual backup. Armed with directions scrawled on a slip of paper, I trekked along a dirt lane that afternoon, passing banana groves and scattered huts until I reached a humble temple compound. The gate read Chua Tan Luong. A carved statue of a guardian lion flanked the entrance. A single bell hung from the eaves, occasionally chiming in the breeze. Inside, the courtyard offered a few potted plants and a simple altar. At the far end stood a small main hall. I found a middle-aged monk in gray robes, presumably Thay Tuan, sweeping the steps. He paused, offering a polite smile. I introduced myself, explaining the disturbing experiences at Ha's house. The grave sites, the footprints, the black shadow haunting my dreams. Thay Tuan listened with grave attention. Ninh Bình is steeped in ancient energies, he remarked. Some benevolent, some not. A restless soul or other entity might attach itself to unsuspecting travelers. He ushered me into a side room, tea in hand, and elaborated. Stories abound of a black shadow that manifested around certain tragic family plots. Many such appearances revolve around violent or unnatural deaths. It can feed on fear, shaping nightmares. If the family never performed proper rituals, the spirit might linger, turning malevolent. My chest tightened. So you believe the black shape is a real presence, not just nightmares? He nodded slowly. Possibly. We can attempt a cleansing ritual. But the family themselves, especially the main caretaker, must be willing to release the spirit or rectify past grievances.
I recalla tas reluctança.
Would she even cooperate? Yet I was desperate. Please, can you come see the place? Tonight, if possible. I'm worried it's getting stronger. He set his teacup down with a sigh. I'll do what I can. Though these matters can be dangerous. If the spirit is truly malicious, a confrontation might escalate. Nonetheless, he agreed to accompany me back near dusk. Gratitude flooded me, tempered by dread of the unknown. We returned to Ha's house around sunset, the sky a blaze of orange. I introduced Thay Tuan, who bowed respectfully. Ha wore a guarded expression but let him inside. He walked the property, pausing near the graves, murmuring prayers under his breath. The air felt weighted, as though pressing on our lungs. After conferring with Ha, the monk decided to prepare a small ceremony to appease or banish the restless spirit. He spread out a cloth in the main room, placing offerings, incense sticks, fruit, and small bowls of salt. Ha helped set a low table. I hovered uncertain, watching him arrange a few carved wooden talismans and a container of blessed water. Nightfall arrived, and the canal outside glowed silver under a half-moon. The cicadas fell silent, replaced by a heavy hush. Thay Tuan lit incense and recited mantras. I felt goosebumps crawling my arms. Ha's face twitched with old sorrow. Midnight approached. The plan was to lure the black shadow into revealing itself, then guide or force it to depart. My mind spun with fear. If this spirit was truly violent, What if it attacked? With steady composure, Thay Tuan took a small bell in hand. He walked slowly around the interior, chanting. The house's shadows seemed to ripple in response. I clenched my fists, sweat beading. Ha pressed her lips tight, tears reflecting the candlelight. She whispered that if the spirit was indeed her daughter's ghost, she hoped it wouldn't lash out. Abruptly, the temperature dropped. A gust of cold wind blew through, snuffing out one of the candles. The overhead bulb flickered. Thay Tuan's chanting intensified, his voice echoing oddly. My pulse thundered. Something was stirring. Then from the corridor leading to my bedroom, a dark shape slid along the wall. We all gasped. The black shadow grew taller, limbs elongated, merging with the gloom. Thay Tuan rang the bell, stepping forward. In the name of compassion and peace, show yourself, he commanded. My heart nearly stopped at his boldness. The shadow hesitated, as if resisting. Then it advanced into the main room. Candlelight revealed a vaguely humanoid silhouette, edges flickering like swirling smoke.
Afintmon reverberatet.
Ha stifled a cry, eyes wide with recognition or horror. Thay Tuan lifted a small wooden talisman, chanting rapidly. The shadow writhed, letting out a rasping hiss. For a moment, it quivered as though in pain. I'd never seen such a thing, intangible yet menacing, a swirl of blackness shaped like a tall figure. My mind screamed that it shouldn't be real. Incense smoke coiled around it, clinging to the swirling edges. The spirit flared, arms stretching toward Ha. She stumbled backward, tears streaming. My daughter, is that you? She whispered, voice trembling. The shadow let out a deeper moan, echoing through the room. Thay Tuan cast salt across the floor. If you are bound by tragedy, we release you from this place, he proclaimed. If you bring harm, we repel you. The shadow recoiled, as if scalded by the salt. Then, in a burst of fury, it lunged at the monk, swirling around him. The candles flickered madly, nearly extinguished. I felt a wave of cold slam me, forcing me to gasp for breath. Holding his ground, Tuan thrust the talisman forward, chanting a final invocation. The black shape trembled, contorting. Ha wailed, half-lurching as though wanting to embrace it. I yanked her back, fear of what that contact might do. The shadow let out a hideous shriek that rattled the windows. My head pounded, eardrums near bursting. Then, as swiftly as it appeared, the shape disintegrated, like ink dispersing in water, vanishing into the corners of the house. The oppressive chill lifted, replaced by stagnant warmth. Silence crashed in, broken only by Ha's sobbing and my ragged breaths. Thay Tuan collapsed to one knee, sweat pouring down his brow. The entire confrontation had lasted mere minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Ha turned tear-filled eyes on him, voice shaking. Is it gone? He inhaled. For now, yes. But if the underlying cause, unresolved grief or a misdeed, remains, it may return. You must properly honor your deceased, ensure they rest peacefully. Ha nodded numbly, whispering gratitude. I stood, heart racing, battered by the shock of witnessing an actual manifestation. The black shadow was no mere nightmare. It was something far darker. The next day, Thay Tuan oversaw a more thorough ritual at the graves behind the house. He lit fresh incense and carefully performed prayers, assisted by Ha. She offered tearful apologies to her late daughter, admitting regrets for unspoken words and possibly incomplete funeral rites. I stood by, a respectful observer, still grappling with the memory of that black shape. The monk poured blessed water around the markers, reciting lines in Old Sino-Vietnamese. A faint breeze rustled the grass. No swirling darkness appeared this time, only a gentle hush. Ha placed small offerings of fruit and rice beside each stone, trembling with emotion. She finally spoke, "Daughter, rest now. I free you of all sorrow." An unexpected calm settled. I sensed the atmosphere lighten, the tightness in my chest easing. Maybe the spirit, if it truly was her child's restless ghost, had found solace. Or perhaps some darker presence was banished. Either way, the environment no longer felt charged with malice. That evening, I found myself drifting into a more peaceful sleep. No nightmares, no black figure perched on the wardrobe. I woke at dawn, feeling refreshed for the first time since arriving. Ha looked equally relieved, though quiet. She quietly thanked me for convincing her to accept Thay Tuan's help. I packed my belongings, preparing to depart. My cousin's outpost was further up the road, and from there, I'd catch a bus back to Hanoi. Though I'd only spent a few nights here, the experience felt like a surreal chapter of my life. "You can stay any time," Ha said softly, eyes lowered. "I'll keep the house better now, for travelers." I nodded, unsure if I'd ever want to revisit. Still, I offered a polite thanks, hoping she'd remain safe. The last glimpse I had of the property was her standing by the front door, the canal glimmering behind her, the old graves faintly visible among the weeds. A soft wind rustled the reeds, as if whispering a final farewell. Riding away in a borrowed motorbike from the neighbor, I felt a swirl of emotions: relief, amazement, lingering unease. The events in that house were no mere illusions or local folklore. I'd seen the black shadow manifest with my own eyes, heard its shrieks echo in the night. And yet, through the monk's intervention and Ha's acceptance, that haunting presence seemed dispelled. When I visited Cousin Hai for a final meal, I recounted the ordeal with caution, half expecting him to dismiss it. Instead, his face paled in fascination. "I've heard stories of restless spirits in these rural areas," he murmured, "but never realized how real it could be. I'm glad you're safe." The next morning, I boarded a bus to Hanoi, gazing out at the passing rice fields. My mind churned over the memory of the black silhouette perched above me in that horrifying dream, the footprints behind the grave, the final moment it shrieked before dissipating. Some part of me ached with empathy for Ha, who had likely endured years of subtle torment. Maybe her daughter's tragic story remained half-told. I returned to city life, but the recollections never fully left. On nights when the wind howled, I sometimes startled awake, imagining a flicker of darkness at the edge of my vision. Each time, I steadied myself, reminding that I was no longer in that canal-side house. I'd parted ways with that ghost, at least I hoped so. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Ha. She wrote that the house remained peaceful, no further signs of ominous shadows. She visited the graves weekly, offering prayers. Though brief, the note carried a sense of closure. I smiled faintly, folding the letter away. The black shadow was an echo of unresolved sorrow, now laid to rest under the watchful eye of compassion. Yet, in my quieter moments, I still recall that first dreadful night when I glimpsed a monstrous shape above my wardrobe, and the hush that followed. If not for the old monk's help, who knows how events might have escalated. In a world straddling the line between superstition and reality, sometimes acknowledging the unseen is the only path to dispelling its darkness.